move on to our second question, which Bruce will head out, and then Nick, you can chip in as well if you see an opportunity there. The second question does also come from one of our real estate agents that we've been working with, and she has a question here specifically that states that they have a situation where a tenant has passed away in a property, right? He was living alone, that's the tenant, and his family then discovered the body, right, the previous day, well, the day following the day of cause of death. So the question then comes from the estate agent, and the question is, do we have the right to know how he passed away so that they can inform the owner? So maybe Bruce, just dive in there and tell us what rights sort of come into place, who will be able to need, maybe they need to know type of legislation there on.
Well, I can really do understand that a property owner would want to know the reason as for the passing of the tenant. Perhaps it was something in the property itself, or maybe it was a health condition. I can really understand and sympathize with the landlord wanting to know. As for the legislative provisions and what can a landlord do, generally speaking, the landlord does not have the right to that particular information. That being said, there are always exceptions, but first there's a practical solution. Before ensuing in litigation and going into the legalese of it, maybe just asking in a friendly conversation what happened. We'd just like to make sure that it wasn't as a result of the flat. The landlord just wants to improve things. That way you can get that information, but bear in mind that this sort of information is often not at hand of the survivors, and typically only gets found out later and often is not disclosed. So bear that in mind. If it's a question of the landlord having a claim against the late tenant, that's a bit of a different question, but I'll focus more on getting the information in order to inform the owner. Hypothetically, if the owner suspects that the death was caused by the property, for instance, there was a gas leak, hazardous mold, who knows, then potentially the owner could bring an application in terms of PAIA, the Promotion of Access to Information Act, and assert that the owner needs this information in order to protect or comply with his or her obligations. I do want to mention that it's not as easy as it sounds. It is quite onerous to get that sort of order, and more often than not, the judicial official, be it a judge or magistrate, would ask whether or not it's reasonable to give that sort of information. Hence, my initial advice, speak to them, ask them. Again, a friendly conversation typically yields greater results. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm with you at the end of the day. I don't think there's a clear, easy right to go, I'm entitled access to that type of information. But I think a pragmatic and practical approach is obviously the way to do it. You know, sometimes even as lawyers have to, put down our swords and just take a practical approach to problems and solutions. I don't know whether this, the particular writer had any suspicion of, why unfortunately the tenant has passed, and for our listeners, for those landlords, for those agents out there, this is something that unfortunately does happen. On occasion there is a property and a tenant passes away for whatever reason. I've never seen a case where it is because of a hazardous mold or anything like that. Generally, these problems would pitch up long before there is someone passing away. So I don't know if there's a suspicion. I doubt it very much. I think it's probably just part of life. And in the circumstances, as I say, a pragmatic approach. Speak to whoever, speak to the family members, and see if you can find out any information about the circumstance. And I couldn't agree with you more, Bruce, in the sense that sometimes even the family members are waiting on information, what happened in the circumstances, for a long time, but perhaps even longer than the landlord is going to take, and especially as a landlord, you want to put someone else in your premises. So I don't think a landlord's going to sit and wait for autopsy reports of the circumstances, but again, unless there's got to be some indication beforehand of a dangerous environment or whatever the case is, that would preclude a landlord from actually acting and moving on. I don't think a landlord needs to particularly be worried and, freeze their property in essence, pending some sort of investigation or whatever the case is. I don't think that is the case in 99% of the cases. So while you might not have a right, ask the information. If you can't get the information, either the family's not willing to give it, or they simply don't have the information at the time that you ask them. It's not too much a concern for a landlord, as far as I'm concerned. Bar those exceptional circumstances, if there's a gas leak that you know of in the property, or some sort of hazardous mold, and in those circumstances you're going to know all about it, because some other entity is going to be involved, be it the police, be it whoever, and you'll know there was some extemporaneous problem. But otherwise, try to be pragmatic, and see if you can go that way.
100%, Nick. Actually, as you were speaking, something occurred to me, and it dawned on me that estate agents would be who to keep in touch with the family of the deceased. Potentially, the landlord has a claim, or once the estate's been reported to the Master of the High Court, then because of that information has been obtained, it could facilitate that. Again, this way, estate agents are adding value to their clients, the landlords, and just making things easier. And it also occurred to me, if the landlord's adamant on getting that information, once the estate's been reported, you could get a copy of the master's file, and it should contain the death certificate. This does take an incredible amount of time. I do late estates for a living. Trust me when I say it is not a quick path to follow.
Yeah. There you go. They have it to our viewers. It's not very uncommon, and the information doesn't really necessarily, there's no obligation to disclose it to you. But the best thing to do is not to perhaps tamper with the scene or anything like that. Speak to the police, speak to the family members, see if somebody is willing to say something, and if not, depending on the sensitivity of the issue, wait for the right time and information might come to you. But that does cover both our questions for today. Thank you for our viewers for joining us once again today. Thank you, Nick, and to, of course, our special today, Bruce. And please, guys, for our viewers, keep giving us the questions, comment, like, and share, and subscribe to our channels. Thank you, guys, and see everybody again next week.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye all.
Cheers.